So at one stage in New Zealand, there was 168 internet companies. So a lot of them were horrendously non-successful because they would yell at you on the phone. And I was like, no, this is marketing. He took off with the company records. And so I didn't have access to the accounting thing. So then I couldn't tell IRD, I couldn't prove anything. I went round to his house with a baseball bat and I knocked the baseball bat on the window and I said, I'm coming through this window and I'm getting my stuff. So I booked a flight and flew out of Thailand. And when I landed, literally at Auckland Airport, on the screens, it was like massive tsunami, 200,000 people died. And on the island, the resort that I was at, every single person died. So there was kind of like a final destination thing. Bought a $10 million house in Milford. The house had 9 bedrooms. It had 3 living rooms. Ended up building a nightclub that was looked out to the beach with a view of Rangitoto that was bigger than most people's houses, with fish tanks and retractable stripper poles. The whole last year of 9 years was a year of selling it. And because I took my eye off the ball, because I'm worried about the sale process, then I'm no longer selling, so then our growth isn't as good. So then they're like, oh, well, your growth's not so good. You guys get to look up my skirt this much, and if you don't like it, you can piss off, I was a business person in search of an opportunity, and then I went to university, and at university, for the first time in my life, I wasn't like the retard, because
Hi, I'm Josh, and welcome to 2's, the multi-million dollar exit show. Today on the show, really excited, I have an old friend of mine who's been around in technology for a whole bunch of years and was a real innovator and a pioneer in the internet space, the ISP space, and also had one of the really first big exits out of New Zealand as well. So Seeby Woodhouse is an all-round raconteur, he's a photographer, he's got a big social following, and he's a guy that hasn't really been around the press for too much over the last couple of years. So great opportunity to bring Seeby back into a conversation around kind of currency and what he's up to these days. And so Seeby, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah,
it's a pleasure.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So I always start these conversations by a bit of a backstory, the where you're from, the how you got started in business, whatever you think might be quite helpful to introduce yourself to the audience. So over to you, Seeby.
Sure. Well, most people know me for being the founder of Orcon, which arguably still the third largest internet service provider in New Zealand, but is now part of 2's, and 2's started out as a mobile company and Orcon was kind of a fixed line company, and then 2's did a whole gobble up so that they, had kind of things. But Orcon, the old company, is still operating as a brand, although they're just in the process of shutting it down. But it's arguably, kind of half of a multi-billion dollar company with $1.3 billion of turnover. So I started that when I was sort of 18, 19, back in sort of 95, 96, and exited within 9 years before I was 30 for 25 million, most of which was mine because I had a business partner that came in for a little bit, my CTO. And so I ended up with multi-tens of millions as an under 30-year-old, which was nice. But I kind of did everything perfectly in those years. I found the right opportunity. I worked my ass off. I started with no money. I kept a hold of the company, all of those kind of things. But I missed the kind of hockey stick where, if you know anything about exponentials, normally there's kind of a curve where it looks like nothing's happening, and nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden it's bang. So, a few years after I sold Orcon, it transacted for 300 million. So I think did 90% of the work and, only got 10% of the money. So in retrospect, that's a bit of a regret. And I've had a few other really close calls on kind of turning the money that I did make into, hundreds of millions or $1 billion, and I just kind of missed those, which potentially we can go on to, so that kind of grates on me as well. So I try not to be a negative Nelly, but I did really, really well when I was young, and I kind of didn't get to those hundreds of millions, and I had opportunities too that I can clearly see if I just done this one thing, that's where I would have been. So tens of millions is nice, but tens of millions is kind of, maybe you can afford a helicopter and a boat, whereas hundreds of millions is like you can have houses all around the world and, holidays in Monaco, and it's a different kind of thing. But money's not everything either. So but it's nice when you win.
It takes away some problems to have enough of it. So
yeah.
that's a really good intro. I'm just going to dwell on the starting story there a little bit, if we can.
Sure.
The feedback that I've had from listeners is that they really enjoy the origin story from people. So 19 years old, the boyfriend Glenfield is how you've described yourself to me in the past. So what was the thing that got you into business in the first place? So you, I think, went to university but then dropped out. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, so if we step back before that even, if you listen to Tony Robbins, he's kind of got a theory that there's really only two motivators, pain and pleasure. And essentially our central nervous system is sort of designed from an early age to seek out pleasure, whether that's, mother's boob or, warmth or shelter or all those kind of things, sugar, and avoid pain, being hurt, being cut, all those kind of things. So there's kind of that deep psychological programming, and a saying that I like is that there's only 3 generations from rags to riches and back again, and kind of what it means is that oftentimes the kids of wealthy parents end up kind of being lazy and basically frittering away their parents or their granddad's fortunes.
Yeah.
And then you get, some dustpan boy or, Leo on the Titanic or something that's like got the gumption to, pull himself up by the bootstraps and, get where he wants to go and, do what needs to be done, those things. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs, not some entrepreneurs come from wealthy families, but a lot of entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley guys are just, really, really determined and have an idea in a garage and they make it happen. So for me, just circling back to the motivators, I don't think I would be where I was without some kind of pain motivation. And for me, the pain motivation was I never really wanted for anything, and I can't say that I walked barefoot through the snow, but I kind of felt a feeling of lack as a child. We were definitely middle class. I had 2 very educated parents, which were good parents, I think, and they gave me an incredible vocabulary and the ability to think for myself. But you've probably noticed that just being smart doesn't produce results. So there's plenty of completely broke university professors, and there's plenty of wealthy, people with low IQs. So that's intelligence is not the answer. And in my parents' case, I think my dad struggled with a career or making any kind of money or whatever, and potentially had some negative connotations to money and maybe even felt some kind of level of shame around that. And, so for example, we didn't celebrate Christmas in my household. We didn't put up a Christmas tree, maybe because my dad didn't want to, worry about presents too much. So my Christmas presents and things came from my mum's parents, on my sort of grandparents' side. And I was like, I want to go to Napier to go to, the grandparents' house because then I get a Christmas. And I... my parents did give me things, but I basically bought my first bicycle with my own paper run money, and it was kind of like, I'm going to have to get out here and make it happen. So I lied about my age. I don't think you were allowed a paper run until you were 13, and I got one when I was 11. By the time I was 13, I had 3 paper runs. So, I was definitely not afraid. I hated getting up in the morning. I hated winter time. But I would be up there doing three Herald runs when you're only supposed to have 1, and basically lying to the guys to get more runs. And my cousin got a run, and then he ended up not doing it, so I took his over secretly and then got his money. But it was pitiful money, and it was like really hard work. But I was like, I'm motivated. I'm going to get something. And when I was 15, there was a program that was trialled for a while, the Star Driver program, where you could do advanced driving, where they put you on like the skid cars, where they have like the little wheels, they jack you up, and it sort of simulates a skid, and you can go through cones and everything. So there was kind of a trial where if you did the Caltech Star Driver program, you could skip your waiting periods for licenses. So on my 15th birthday, I went basically learner's license, then a day later I got my restricted license, then a day later I got my full license because I had those concessions. I think they've taken that away now. But basically, I was 15 years old, the full license, and then I had my paper run when I had a car. So on my basically 2 days after my 15th birthday, I was like fully licensed driver, the only person with a car. Bang, I've got it. And it was kind of my own money from paper and stuff. So I was really determined to make it. And yeah, I guess I just had this feeling of lack as a child. And then in 1987, I would have been, in 1987 I was 11, so 11 was not when I started my paper runs. But what happened in 1987 is my granddad died when I was 6 and left me a coin collection that I think would have been worth a lot of money, definitely now, because it was a huge coin collection and all organised, and there was boxes and things, and I think it could be worth a lot of money. Anyway, my dad decided that it was kind of pointless having this coin collection, took it off me, and purchased shares in the 1987 share market crash. And
how long before the crash was that?
Literally the Black Tuesday. It was called Black Monday globally, but because New Zealand was kind of ahead, it was Black Tuesday for us. So that was October 1987. And I was 11 at that stage, and I think my dad started getting into the share market in August 1987. So there's a saying that when your barber starts giving you share advice, you should probably get out. And my dad was kind of the barber. Like, everyone got excited, and then there was a company called Gold Corp in New Zealand that was basically saying, our shares are backed by gold, so there's no way to lose. But then it turned out they didn't have any gold; they just were printing shares. So that went 100% to zero. So my dad bought Gold Corp shares, and my mum had basically been the primary breadwinner for the household and pretty much paid off our house. So we ended up, going from almost a fully paid off house to mortgaging the house for shares, which is the worst thing you can do, and just terrible financial decisions. And then I think I remember, seeing something in the aftermath, with people jumping out of buildings and things. And I think I remember either Bob Jones or Briley basically saying, we kind of knew it was coming, and, you shouldn't be in the share market unless you're a sophisticated investor. And I remember seeing someone on the yacht, I think it was, Bob Jones or something. Anyway, and so I'm thinking, well, what the hell is a sophisticated investor? And it's clearly not my parents, clearly not my dad. My mum was probably a bit wiser, to be honest, so she doesn't get the blame. But my dad got exuberant and lost all our money. And, even basically sold my granddad's coin collection, which I wanted to keep. But he was like, no, we're going to put money into shares. So I felt that I had lost money, unfairly. My coin collection had been stolen off me, and then it had gone to dust. So I was kind of annoyed about all that, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to learn about business. And the thing about life is that, attention breeds focus, right? Where focus goes, energy flows. So, if you get interested in soccer and you get a soccer ball for Christmas and things, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's soccer on TV, I'm gonna look at that. Or you kind of notice when something pops up in the Herald about soccer, and you read about soccer and you think about soccer, and then you start doing all the things. So business like that, in 1987, that was the thing. Losing all my money, figuring out, hey, hang on, my parents are really smart. My dad was a sort of a autistic / Asperger's kind of genius. He potentially had an IQ way over 160 and, was like a maths genius and things, but struggled with, normal, type social interactions and things like business and that kind of thing. So a hyper-intelligent person that couldn't seem to achieve. But, gave me some gifts that I have, and I appreciate, him for what he was. So basically that share market crash, and that pain and losing my granddad's coin collection to just total waste, got me thinking about business and passionate about business. So whenever someone would mention business, I've got, a family that comes from a legal background. So my great uncle, Seeby Woodhouse, invented ACC, and he was one of the longest serving High Court judges in New Zealand, and member of the Northern Club, founding member of the Northern Club, that kind of thing. So
he was knighted, did you say? A sir?
Yes, he was, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't get passed down, does it?
No, it doesn't get passed down. But anyway, so I have several uncles on that side of the family that are lawyers, and one of my uncles is still my lawyer today. And so law is sort of, intimately involved with business. So even when I was young, I was sort of like, how do you form a company? What is a company? How does it work? Asking all these kind of questions when most kids are thinking of, barely thinking about girls. I started obsessing about like, what does it mean? And I don't want to, so, and then, that's where the paper run came from and, various entrepreneurial kind of things. So when I was in school, the other thing I think that probably is a part of my story is that I was homeschooled until that share market crash event, because when I went to school in primary school, corporal punishment was allowed, and relatively early in my very first days of primary school, someone threw something at a teacher, like a paper dart or something. And the teacher turned around and thought it was me, but I was just like not paying attention. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, I'm getting belted around the head. But I didn't even know what had happened. So I'm like, oh, there's just this big person like beating the shit out of me for a reason that I didn't kind of understand until, I was kind of determined or whatever. So then I just like ran out of the school, ran home crying. And then my dad was like, went to the school, was like, going to pound the teacher into the pavement kind of thing. And then was like, screw this, I'm not, my son's not going to school. So he pulled me out of school at 5, and then said he was going to homeschool me, but then didn't homeschool me and didn't teach me anything. So he was just like kind of had me at home, and he was a writer. So
what did you do?
Was well, I basically taught myself to read with comic books. And I kind of had a bit of help, but I used to read Scrooge McDuck, which is also a bit of my story. So I used to love Scrooge McDuck and the vault of money and everything, and diving in money. I was like, oh, yes, money, So as a kid, and so this is stepping right back. So I taught myself how to read, and then both my parents were actually librarians, so intelligent people, and they met at library school, and so our house was just full of books. But my mum had a daytime job, and my dad would stay at home writing, and then he would basically lock himself in his room, to focus. And so he would just be like, oh, get the kid out of here. So I basically had, kind of 7 years where I had virtually no contact friends, and I was just entertaining myself at home.
You were only child?
Only child, yeah.
Okay.
And so, and there weren't that many kids in our neighbourhood, so I used to literally sit outside my dad's door and like read books and things, not outside the door, but, in the garden or something. So in that period, I read several hundred books, and we used to have a kids encyclopedia called Life or something that was like maybe a quarter the size of the Britannica and 17 volumes or something, and I got from A to K on the encyclopedia. So I read everything about everything, and I learned about like how ships work and engines, and they had like cutaway diagrams and everything. So I was this like unbelievable brain box in terms of like knowledge, but I couldn't kick a ball. I couldn't interact with kids because I sort of spoke at an adult level, and I'm a little bit on the spectrum like my dad. So anyway, so because of the 1987 share market crash, my parents split up. My dad left, and my mum became a solo mum for a while. So she had to put me in school. So when I went to school, basically I was this really weird kid that like couldn't kind of play handball or do anything. I actually couldn't write because when you're a little kid and you do the A's and the B's and the C's, like your hand kind of gets how that works. It's like
muscle memory.
If you pick up, a pen with your left hand, it feels super weird. Well, I couldn't do anything with a pen. So I literally was in school, intermediate, unable to write. And so they put me in the class with the, kind of mentally challenged kids, because they were like, oh, we don't know where this kid's going to go.
What do we do with this kid?
And then I spoke like a 23-year-old, and I had this huge like dialect, and I'd use words that the teachers didn't understand, and they were like, what the hell? But I couldn't do maths, and I couldn't do anything, and I couldn't, so it's like, what do we do with this kid? And then thankfully, from my short time at intermediate, I wanted to go to Westlake, because I went to Takapuna Normal Intermediate, and then I wanted to go to Westlake because it's kind of where the decent kids on the shore went or whatever. But they were like, no, you can't come. You're a weirdo. So I had an interview with the principal, and he was like, definitely not. So I got rejected. So I had to go to my home school, kind of Glenfield College, which I wasn't too keen on. But my last intermediate teacher kind of saw something into me and recommended that instead of being put in the intellectually challenged class, that I'd be put in like a good class. Anyway, from that kind of stress, sorry if I go into so much detail, but from that stress, I kind of thought, oh my God, my life is literally wrecked. Like, my dad's really screwed me up, and I'm so far behind that I'm never going to have, when you're a kid, you kind of like, if you don't pass this exam, you're going to be a failure. And it's like, you don't understand that life's a bit bigger than that, and that you don't actually, school doesn't matter that much. Like, who looks at your report card later? But to me, it seemed like this massive thing of like, oh my God, I am 7 years behind everyone else. So basically, I did nothing for 5 years at high school other than work my butt off. And if I had like a runny nose, like literally snot coming out of my nose, I would force myself to go, like, walk to the school in the rain, and my parents would be like, stay at home, you're really sick, and the teachers would be like, why are you at school, you're so sick? And I'm like, I'm not missing a single day. So I never missed a single day of school in high school.
So everyone else was wagging at Glenfield High and smoking dope, and there's Seeby there all day, every day doing all the work.
I was like the biggest overachiever nerd. And then I got so bored by the subjects that I was sort of caught up fairly rapidly. And then in sixth form, I ended up doing 8 bursary subjects when you're only supposed to do 5.
Yep.
And so I used to study like 3 additional subjects at home in order to kind of get more knowledge. I was like, I'll have the accounting things, I'll have the books, I'll sit the exam. So I actually sat 8 bursary papers in sixth form. And then I should have just gone to university with my friend, but I decided to stick around for 7 years, 7th form, and then try and year 13.
Bursary, for those
and
that
try
are
and
younger,
redo everything.
Bursary is a 7th form or a year 12 thing, as opposed to you were doing it a year 11, which is in 6th form, right?
Yeah.
So you decided to go back and do 7th form, and repeat the same things again, or do
and then kind of tutor all the cute 7th form girls in mathematics and all of that kind of thing. And I'd kind of done school, but I had like a year where I didn't have to work that hard because I'd already studied everything the year before. But my grades actually in 7th form were actually worse than 6th form because you start forgetting stuff, and I didn't do any study.
Right.
I just tutored the girls in my class.
Oh yeah.
So that was kind of a waste of time. Anyway, in 7th form, actually 6th and 7th form, that was the first year I believe that we had the Young Enterprise Scheme, Lion Foundation Young Enterprise Scheme, which is kind of about teaching kids about business. And so of course, going back to my analogy, is if you get interested in soccer, you listen out for things to do with soccer. So as soon as they said, there's this extracurricular thing, you have to stay at school after hours, but it's a business class, I was like, oh yes, I'll definitely do that. So my 6th form, I did Young Enterprise in 6th form, 7th form. Both my businesses were dismal failures. My 7th form, either my 6th or 7th form business, one of the years, I can't remember what the other year was, but one of the years our business idea was to make business cards and stationery for people. And this is virtually, kind of pre-internet. Business cards are important. Every business person needs a business card. So, it wasn't a bad idea. And we found, me and my Young Enterprise teammates found lots of people that needed business cards. We had lots of takers. And then we had the brilliant idea, there's like this is after school extracurricularly, there's like a school print room. We'll just ask our teacher if we can like print some stuff. So one of the teachers kind of like blindly, not really knowing what was going on, said, you can use the school print room after hours. So the school would shut down, we would have our after school business, and then we would do all of the stationery and printing, use the school printers. And then the school's like scratching their head, like, what the hell?
How are we spending so much money?
And so we had this huge profit margins, like no cost. We're like, yes, business is freaking awesome, not kind of really thinking we were doing anything wrong. But then, we got in kind of a lot of trouble. It's like, what the hell?
Because you weren't paying for your supplies.
So zero cost of goods sold, fantastic. But the great thing was that I learned about, what's a shareholder, what's the company's office, how do you register a company, because they make you go through the whole process. So you fill out the forms, you get the understanding, you do like a meeting and you have a secretary and a note taker and a this and a that. So anyway, although my businesses were dismal failures, sometimes business is about putting one foot in front of the other and just doing it. And so I was a business person in search of an opportunity. And then I went to university, and at university, for the first time in my life, I wasn't like the retard, because in school everyone was like, oh, that's like the dork, that's like Seeby the dork, because I was kind of a bit socially awkward, and those people knew me when I went to school. But by the time I got to university, I could kind of pretend that I was just like a normal person and no one knew my history. So I went completely nuts, at Auckland University, just basically, doing no work and, drinking at Shadows and like chatting up girls and, having girlfriends and like all that kind of thing. And so I was top of my school and pretty high up in the country in several subjects. I was top of Glenfield College in English. I was number 1 in calculus. I was number 2 in statistics. I was number 1 in physics. And across a couple of years, so I didn't quite end up getting ducks, although I was in top in a bunch of subjects because his top marks were higher. But I was nearly duck. So I went from basically retard of the school, excuse my French, to to kind of one under ducks, but almost got ducks. So then at university, it just seemed like we were kind of going over 7th form stuff and like rehashing things. So I was like, cool, I don't have to study, and no one's making me, and this is great. So I didn't do any study in first year, passed, no problem at all. And then got into second year, and I was doing electrical engineering just because I've always liked kind of things where you can get a right answer, electricity and maths and all that kind of thing. And all of a sudden I was having problems in second year not going to lectures, and a lot of my lectures were at 8 a.m, which was really annoying because I was on the shore and I couldn't get there and kept on missing things. And then all of a sudden I was failing, and I was like, oh, this isn't very much fun. And then in one of the lectures we heard about the internet, and as soon as I heard about the internet, it's like Bitcoin for some young people, I was just like, shit, this is the way of the future. It just like hit me in the lecture. So I just literally walked out of the lecture and then was like, okay, I'm going to start an internet company. I don't know anything about it. I literally had $100 in my bank account. And back to my comment about putting one foot in front of the other, it was just, okay, I did Young Enterprise Scheme. I know how to set up a company. I literally walked from Albert Park to Queen Street, and the company's office used to be on Queen Street. Went into the company's office, said, I want to start a company. And then, they were like, what's the name? And I'm like, oh, shit, okay, I'll come back. So then I came back tomorrow, and me and my cousin kind of got prefixes and suffixes, and I already thought global. So I wasn't going to be like Glenfield Computer Company or, whatever. I was like, what's a name that's unique? I need to make it up because I don't want anyone else to have it. I want to be like, this could be global. So we decided on making up a name that didn't exist, and I came out with Orcon, which was kind of original connection, something like that.
Got it.
But, and I could have like the .com and all of that kind of stuff, and, get on top of, things. And then it turned out that a NASA government department was called Orcon, and they took the domain off me. So then I lost all my good planning went to nothing. But then, so that was day one, registering the company. Well, day one was thinking of the name. Day two was registering the company for $29.85. I remember the amount. And then it was like, okay, I have a certificate of incorporation. I'm going to go to the bank, get a bank account. And then I was like, I need a post office. And then I need a thing. And then I was like, I need a logo. I need a blah. And it was just every day thinking, what would an internet company have? Pretty soon, within about 10 days, I got to, I need to actually sell some internet stuff. So Tim and Nick Wood were kind of the pioneers, and they had a cyber cafe before they really started selling internet mainstream, not too far from here, not High Street, but around the corner. So I went and saw Tim and Nick, and I said, I want to start an internet company. I want to compete with you. It's like, like an 18-year-old kid, and they're like, well, we're the internet people, and you can't. And I was like, well, how about I sell your service, and then I'll just make my own margin, call it my own thing. And of course, when you used to dial into the internet, so when you dial in, you don't know where you're getting the internet. So I basically, the way that I started was I just started selling internet connections to people, but hooking them up with another company unbeknownst to them, and then got my own phone number. So you used to be able to do kind of call a diversion, and so there'd be like a dial-in number. So I had an Orcon dial-in number, but then I would just redirect that to, iHug or Extra or whoever was kind of providing the service.
Tim and Nick were iHug from memory, is that right?
Tim and Nick would,
sold it to Vodafone, I think, didn't they? iHug.
Correct, yeah. 80 million, back in the day.
Yeah.
And iHug, basically Tim and Nick, they only started 1 year before me and with $10,000, and I started 1 year later with no money, and they kind of made 80 million and I made 20 million. We both did okay, but just being that slight bit earlier was an advantage. But anyway, when I started, there was Actrix in Wellington, which was actually the world's first commercial internet service provider, which was actually a company I bought later sucked into Voyager. It's another story. And there was iHug, there was Icons, there was a few others. Telecom Extra hadn't actually been born yet when I started. And Waikato University, and everyone was kind of getting internet through Waikato University through a 2 meg cable to Australia. But as soon as I could afford, I bought the very first piece of equipment that iHug used, which then became obsolete. And then so terminal server 1.ihug became terminal server 1.orcon. And then I started getting hand-me-down gear from like iHug, and I would just turn up at their offices and bug them, like, you got anything to sell? You got any old gear? Like, give me some modems. Like, and they're like, oh God, there's a pile of old modems there. They don't work, they're shit, And I was like, okay. And another interesting thing in the story is I didn't know anything about the internet. I didn't know anything technical whatsoever. I didn't even have a computer at home. So a lot of people would say, well, you can't start an internet company. But for me, it was a sales proposition and it was cool. And so, I just started selling other people's service. And then once I had about 1,000 customers signed up, I used to drive around all day, every day. If people would ring up, it used to, this is going back a bit, but it used to be quite hard to get onto the internet. Yeah. So, half of New Zealand was still on Windows 3.1. Windows 95 made it a little bit easier, but if you had an internal modem in your grey box, there was a thing called COM ports. Yeah. You had to have software drivers.
It was tricky.
The internet stuff didn't come with the computer. You had to have floppy disks of things. Yeah. So actually getting a base computer, it didn't just come with internet software. You had to have internet software. You had to have Eudora Mail. You had to have Netscape. You had to have all these kind of programs to install. So it took about 3 hours to get someone's computer hooked up onto the internet.
Did you do that yourself?
And so a lot of providers either used to make you do it yourself, or it was only technical people that could do it. And so I just used to do it for free. So I sort of got this cult following where you'd ring up and say, I want to get onto the internet, and I'd say, okay, I'm going to drive out to Titirangi now. So for several years in the early days, I'd literally be driving across town all day with my cellular telephone, hooking people up, getting them going, and then just being like, and then I got, word of mouth. So I had a huge number of people in the Indian community that were like, you've got to check out Seeby, he'll do a good job getting you on. So it was just, service to the max. But because I didn't have a computer and I didn't know a computer, I got my friend from school to show me the process of like hooking up to iHug, and I got their things and I signed up as a customer. So I was selling Orcon, but I had an iHug connection because I didn't have my own service. So I had to figure out how that worked and have my own computer. And my first kind of ever customer, or one of my first customers, I went round to his house. He was a lawyer in Milford that I still kind of know. And I absolutely butchered his computer, installing some software. And I'm like sweating. And then it's like I've been there all day, and it's like days turning into night. And he's like, I've got important legal stuff on there. Like everything's okay, isn't it? And I'm like, the computer's not starting up. And I'm just sweating. So I rung my school friend. And I was like, I will pay you anything. You have to come to this guy's house. I've done something really bad. I've installed something over something else. And so my friend from school came, and then I paid him to fix my mess and show me what I'd done, and I was
did he get the data back?
Yeah, he managed to fix it, but I'd literally stuffed up this guy's boot sector so the computer wouldn't boot. Yeah. And not knowing computers, I'm just lost, and then I'm making it worse and overwriting the operating system, and it was pretty bad. I'll
jump in there. I'll just do a quick recap, and then I'll kind of drill down on a couple of points if that's okay. Let you get some liquid. midway through your second year of university, things weren't going terrifically well at university because you were having too much of a good time and not doing the study thing. And then there was this kind of bolt that hit you, which would have been, so it was about 96, 97, because the internet was commercialised in 95. 96, we started to be able to get it publicly, but really no one was on there. And only extreme geeks or the universities were people that were really kind of getting themselves exposed to it. So you had this bolt of awareness, and one of the things that my researcher dug up is that you actually came across Bitcoin in 2010, I think it was.
2008, yeah.
2008.
Literally when Satoshi came up with the white paper.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So interesting question for you. So you saw the possibility with the internet, even though it was something completely unfamiliar, unknown to a lot of people, and I came across it in about 97, and I didn't see the possibility until about 99, 2000 is when I got into tech. So it took me a couple of 3 years to wake up to how big this was going to be. So what made you not, did you see the thing with Bitcoin, with digital currency as well, and then not pursue it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin, I have like a real frustrating kind of emotional relationship with it. It's like when I was young, I had no money, but I had a belief that came from somewhere. I don't even know where it came from, to be honest. I mean, I think my dad was kind of encouraging, but he's like, don't listen to authority. You can be whatever you want to be. He was always one of those guys. So he did instill me, like, you can do whatever dream you have. It's never, it's not big enough. He was encouraging in that way. So, being poor and just having nothing but time to like fanatically work on something is quite liberating. So, and that worked for the internet. I did see the Bitcoin opportunity. I mean, I read the Satoshi white paper in 2008. I thought it was cool. I have a mathematics background. As I say, I was like number one in the country in like statistics or calculus. I can't remember which one, but I love maths because it's got a right answer.
Probably calculus, because that's a statistic. If you can't remember the statistic, therefore you'd be good at calculus.
I think it was. But yeah, I mean, they're both. Anyway.
Yeah.
And so I thought, yeah, Bitcoin, bang. I had the same feeling when I heard about Bitcoin as when I heard about the internet. But I didn't have a company or any structure, and so it's kind of like I had to do it myself. And I literally should have made $100 million to $1 billion out of Bitcoin. I should have been one of those guys. Mm-hmm. But the reason I didn't is just essentially my focus on perfectionism. And I really didn't want to just basically sign up, give my credit card to one of these wallet companies, which you can do. Like, you go to Coinbase and they manage everything for you. You just have a username and password. You buy some Bitcoin, they do the mining, or they, control everything. But there was even in the early days, there was some sort of scandals, and there was like I can't remember what it was called, the Japanese one that like went under. So I didn't want to use one of these wallet providers. I wanted to have it on my own thing. And so I basically was doing it as a side project where I was like, putting together GPUs and trying to do mining and hashing and working it all out. And essentially it's complicated maths, and you've got to like know the code and all of this kind of thing. So I basically fiddled with Bitcoin from sort of 2008 to 2015 and mined a few coins and kind of, had them on a hard drive, and like had kind of not really, gone serious. And then, I'd watched when it was like, there was the transaction where the first transaction was 10,000 Bitcoins for a pizza. Now one Bitcoin's worth $100,000. So that's $10 billion. And then, things had kind of come up. Anyway, in 2015, I had some Bitcoins, but I had been telling my friends about it for 7 years, which seemed like a decade. Yeah. Like, I've been telling my friends about this, and it's just, it's kind of slowly getting somewhere, but it just doesn't seem like there's any real mainstream adoption. Yeah. And I still haven't worked out the tech, and I'm still not going to use one of these like wallet provider companies. And I kind of almost got there. Anyway, I told one of my friend's sons about it. My friend's son in Australia put $5,000 into Coinbase back in kind of 2013, And as a 21-year-old, he exited with $60 million from something that I'd said to his dad. So I can directly trace someone making $60 million from something I said. I've also got friends in Colombia that did like very well setting up a mining operation, and I told them, and they to their credit, went and did it properly, got a container and a whole lot of things. So anyway, I was getting frustrated that I felt like I was saying all this stuff and no one was really listening, and I felt that kind of the Bitcoin price was essentially a bubble, and I was thinking, it's going to pop. So what happened is in 2015, Bitcoin was about $200. So I sold all my Bitcoin thinking, this has got to be a bubble. Like, a dollar for dollar, like on the US dollar, cool. Like 10 times as much as the US dollar, fine. But a Bitcoin really worth like thousands of times the US dollar, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It just didn't seem that logical. So I'm like, I'm going to pick this as the top, which is dangerous. And what I should have done is sold half my Bitcoins, but I ended up selling all my Bitcoins, made about $500,000, and then was out. And then, 2016, it's like doubled or tripled. Damn it, I don't want to buy in because now's definitely the top. And it's like, it's $10,000. Oh, what the hell? This is a nightmare. And it's $50,000. No, it's $100,000. So yeah, the coins that I had would have been easily $200 million plus. So it's really frustrating.
Frustrating, yeah.
Really frustrating.
I'm going to go back and recount a story, and this is not to make you wrong, but I came across Bitcoin in 2011, I think it was, and read the white paper and thought this seems interesting, but it was just the Wild West back in those days. And you talk about Coinbase, I don't think it existed back in those days. It was about 2017, 2016 it came around, and there was basically...
It's earlier than that.
Yeah, but basically it was getting used for illicit transactions on the dark web was really what it was known for more than anything else. And so, as an investment class, it didn't seem to make sense. But 2016, I started to dollar cost average and just put the same amount in every single week. And I've been doing it since then, just ever increasing amounts. And you were talking about the barber as being the source of truth. When your barber starts talking about stocks, it's time to get out. So my strategy with Bitcoin, this is funny, is that if the coffee guy or my mum starts talking about Bitcoin, I jump on, I do some technical analysis, and I go, yep, it's probably time to sell some. Right. And so I just keep on buying every single week, and then I sell some when I think that it's going to peak out. I do terrible at equities investing. I leave that with someone else now because I get too emotional about them. And I fall in love with the stocks, but with Bitcoin, it's just an asset class to me. And so I see it peak at certain points and I can chart it. I've actually managed to get at the peak every single time, and I declare my tax, by the way, and I pay the tax. But I've been lucky on that specific front. But I'm going to duck back to Orcon here for a second because there's a couple of inflection points that I think are going to be quite important. So you were really super early into the space. You transitioned from being a retailer of someone else's wholesale product into being a full-blown ISP yourself. You were both consumer and business, if memory serves me correctly. You get through the tech wreck that happened in 2001. There was a big collapse in tech stocks and values and all that sort of stuff. You brought in a business partner. I'm keen to talk about that. So what was that moment and why did you bring that person in?
Yeah, so my strategy with Orcon was if we don't grow by over 100% in any 1 year, then I'm a loser and I need to kill myself basically in a violent death. So every kind of January would roll around and I would write a business plan, like what do I think I need to have to do to double the size of the company. And already I think I started in the first customer. I started Orcon before in terms of talking about it, doing stuff, but the first real paying customer was the 10th of September 1996. And by December I had 200 customers. And so my January kind of New Year's resolution sit down was like, how do I get this to 400 customers? But realistically within about a year I had 1,000. So in the first year it was just me, and I'd managed to get it to, it wasn't 1,000, it was 800. In 12 months. So I did it four times. The
entirety of the company. You were sales, support,
pick up
installation,
the phone,
customer
do the
success,
branding, build
everything.
a website, everything.
So you just worked basically, I'm imagining.
And then in the second year, I was like, okay, I'm really unable to hold on to this thing because I've got calls and things. So I hired my cousin who was working at Big Fresh for $2.13 an hour pushing trolleys. And I was like, do you want to make more money than that, but not a lot of money? Just answer the phone so that I don't have to answer the phone. So the way that I see the CEO role is the CEO role is, or founder's role is everything, and then it's everything apart from, answering the phone. And then it's everything apart from answering the phone and doing the accounts. Then it's everything from, so it's a process of exclusion. So my job as CEO kind of got smaller and smaller and smaller every year as I found people to do things that I was doing so that I could do the other stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, second year was me and my cousin. So my cousin was answering the phone. And then at some point in the sort of second year, it became, well, I'm not a real business. All I'm doing is basically selling iHeart connections, and some people are finding out. And, it's like I've got my own phone number. And so what I started doing was kind of beating up other providers. So there was a company, Web Internet, that was providing me services. And I was like, if you don't give me, I've got 1,000 connections. If you give me this price per connection, then I'll take all my connections here. If you don't do that. So what I was doing is kind of beating up the existing internet companies and moving my large business around as a wholesale customer, and then able to, get a margin. But with that money, I started making, $20 a month per customer. Now this is growth, obviously, but I had 1,000 customers, so I had basically $20,000 a month coming in of margin. Not revenue. I had, 100,000 of revenue very quickly. And so then all of a sudden I was able to sort of start, paying for equipment and things and, employees and bits and pieces. But as I say, I didn't even know how to use a computer. So it was really just, I'm looking at this from the perspective of a customer. And an interesting fact is at one stage in New Zealand, I think it was about 99, the number of internet service providers peaked at 168.
Wow.
So at one stage in New Zealand, there was 168 internet companies. And what I noticed about every internet company is it was started by some geek who loved the technology and hated people. And so a lot of them are horrendously non-successful because they would yell at you on the phone. And I was like, no, this is marketing. Like, I'm a dummy. I don't know about the internet, so how would I market to me?
Yeah.
And it was really a commercial proposition, which was kind of my point of difference. And it was like, branding, customer service, marketing, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any tech stuff. So that's when I found another internet provider who was one of these 100 on internet companies, my business partner and friend, a guy called Mark Mackay. And he was, a propeller head. He knew how to program and he knew how stuff worked and that kind of thing. And so basically he had 200 customers and I had 800 customers. And so we decided that we just merged the companies and I'd have 80% and he'd have 20% based on customer numbers and revenue. And
pretty simple.
We looked at it and I had $80,000 in the bank, he had $20,000 in the bank. I had 800 customers, he had 200 customers. All the ratios were there. So when the business was sold, we got 25 mil and I got 20, 21 and he got, sort of 5-ish.
Yeah, got it. Looking back on that, knowing what you know now about business, so that was as a, you were basically a 20-year-old kid when you made that arrangement with your buddy Mark. Would you change anything about that specific transaction, not the sale of the company, but that splitting the company into 80-20?
No, I mean, I at the end of the day, equity is a founder's privilege. And I started 2 years before he did. Like I said, the Wood brothers made 4 times as much money as I did, and they started a year before me. I started a couple of years before Mark, and I made 4 times as much as him. I did have 800 customers. He had 200. Yeah. In my mind, as a shareholder, that's fine. But from his perspective, we both worked on Orcon for like a decade, basically. Me a little bit more, and him, blah, and I got 80% of the spoils. But he understood. I don't think there was any resentment there, and essentially it was my company that he was kind of coming into. Yeah. And also I was always pushing us. So I remember we got to about 10 staff and he really got uncomfortable of like, oh, this is payroll. And I was like, I don't want to get any bigger. Like, let's just stay here and make some money and be comfortable. And I was like, no, push, more. Like, more staff, more customers, more blah. And he was like, ah. So we had arguments of like, me wanting to be, the CEO and him wanting to be the handbrake. So, I'm not sure that he would have made the money that he did without me, and vice versa. I needed him for the technical things, and he needed me to drag him along, and we both made money, and I think we're both happy with that. And we're still friends to this day. In fact, Mark still works for me.
Okay.
He's now just an
Voyager.
employee.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So along the way, there was a multitude of approaches that you had to sell the company, and you held on until 2007. So what did those earlier approaches look like? Were there any that were of note that you kind of go, well, that could have been an interesting deal to do? So tell me about some of those earlier approaches.
Yeah, I mean, when the internet was going, ballistic, there were people approaching all the time. So one of the biggest challenges in the 2000s was there was something in New Zealand called the free internet era, which some people remember, where basically internet companies were giving away internet. Now, that was short-lived, and it was a New Zealand-specific thing, and it basically came down to interconnect agreements. So even to this day, between telephone companies, like Voyager's a fully fledged telephone company, and we have our own Class 5 switch, and we don't buy minutes off someone else. We route them ourselves. So even to this day, there's what's called interconnect, where essentially whoever terminates the telephone call normally gets a cent, and that's pretty true all around the world. Often it's a US cent, in New Zealand it's a New Zealand cent, but basically if I send a call to Spark, they have the customer that I want to get to with the phone number, so I have to give them a cent to use their network to terminate that. Now, it might be a mobile network, it might be whatever, but if Spark wants to send a call to me, they have to give me a cent because I have voice switches and infrastructure and voice over IP and all that kind of thing. So basically there's this 1 cent each way type stuff. Now, if you figure out how many cents there are, how many minutes there are, in a month, it's quite a lot. And it's easily a few $100s. And so Clear Communications back in the day, which was before they were, Vodafone, and before that, anyway, they went through a bunch of iterations. But basically, Clear was the sort of small up-and-coming incumbent, and they only sold business lines because they charged 3 cents a minute to businesses, and that meant if they had if they had to call someone on Telecom's network, they would charge 3 cents a minute and then pay 1 cent a minute because businesses paid for calls, whereas consumers had free calling. So there was this issue that consumers had free local calling from their telco, but the telco has to pay a terminating party. And so when the internet happened, what happened is there was something called call sinks, where internet calls were very long and there was a lot of them. So Clear started saying, if we give money to ISPs to come over to our network, Telecom has got free local calling, their customers call us, and then Telecom pays us 1 cent a minute, and they don't have any revenue. So we didn't care about whether they got any revenue. We just care about getting the revenue. So Orcon was, we were selling internet for $50 a month thereabouts, but we had to pay for lines and calling and all that sort of stuff, as most people did. But there was a few kind of dodgy deals where Clear didn't want to do it themselves because they knew that they could be perceived to be screwing Telecom. And so what they did is they partnered with a few select people, which was basically 3 ISPs, and there was Annette Presley, Malcolm Dick, Call Plus, Slingshot, I for Free, and a bunch of others. And those guys were like, we know this is a bit dodgy. We know that we're basically screwing Telecom, but we're going to make a ton of money, $100, $200 a month off per customer, and then we're going to give away the internet because we're making money on the interconnect. And Clear won't get in trouble. It's the end guys that'll get in trouble, and if only lasts for a certain amount of time, then whatever. So there was these companies that basically went from nothing to huge, and then Telecom screamed blue murder and basically changed the numbering system to, I don't know whether you remember 0867.
Yes.
And because 0867 had a 0, it's a toll call, which means that because it's a toll call, it doesn't attract that charge.
Yes.
And so Telecom basically found a legal loophole around it and said it was traffic engineering, and they needed special numbers so they could do calling and blah, blah.
And this is before they were separated
for
out.
For a 1 or 2 year.
That's the chorus arm that you'd be talking about there, as it's known today.
For a 1 or 2 year period, it was like the Wild West, and And that's how Cool Plus got so big on, like, starting for free.
Got it.
But I was not in that. I was not inside the tent, pissing out or whatever. So I was having a bad time. So I had a company where I had to pay to provide internet, and my customers were paying me, and I was making 20% margin at best, and growing like wildfire because everyone wanted to get on the internet. But all of a sudden I'm competing with people giving it away. So I had customers ringing me up, abusing me, saying, "Oh, you little bastard, you're making all this money. You've been making this money this whole time, and you shouldn't be charging us anything. Other people are giving it away." And I'm like in tears. Oh my God, I'm losing customers, and customers started cancelling. So that was really tough because it's all very well, it's one thing to grow a company and keep your costs in check, but as you grow a company, you have variable costs and fixed costs, and then you start stacking on fixed costs like rent or whatever. And then if your revenue starts trending down, well, then you have this big problem because your fixed costs are often locked in, like rent. So, basically I started losing customers, hemorrhaging customers, and I had to start, firing staff left, right and centre, and, do a whole, make the company smaller and smaller and smaller, and do deals with the landlord and all this kind of thing. So I'd gone from like growing a company to shrinking a company, and pretty soon I owed $200,000 to Telecom, and they didn't really want competition anyway. They wanted Extra to be the only game in town, so they didn't give a shit. So I really got close to bankruptcy, and it was only my Telecom account manager who went into bat and said, "Look, Seeby's working his ass off. He's a good dude, and he's been screwed over by Claire as we have. Let's help him out a bit." And I ended up taking several, a year or more, clawing my way out of debt, repaying $10,000 or $20,000 a month until I was,
Wow.
kind of clear again, and then I started. But yeah, I almost went bankrupt 3 times with Orcon, and I didn't really know what I was doing with business, so it was experimentation. But, external forces, free internet was one case of near bankruptcy. Another case of near bankruptcy was I was kind of like, I said I did 8 subjects at school, and the worst one was accounting, which I did myself, and I kind of didn't really get my head around it, and it really frustrated me because I was like, I love money, I should be good at accounting, but I wasn't. And then I got a negative connotation of like, oh, I didn't do that well at that subject in school. So I was like, I'm not an accountant, I'll let someone else do that. And so as soon as Orcon got big enough where we had an accountant, we had a company accountant, I was just like, oh, I don't need to worry about that stuff.
Oh, you abdicated.
But there's nothing like, you cannot abdicate responsibility as a company owner, because the moment you abdicate responsibility, someone else will step into your failings. And what ended up happening is I had a dodgy accountant who was a piece of crap, and I didn't let him do payments, but he would basically load things into ASB Fastnet, show me what was due to pay, and then I would pay it. And so what he did is he set up an account to himself, nicknamed IRD, and then there was all these IRD payments, but instead of paying the IRD, it was actually paying him. And so 3 years after he became an accountant, all of a sudden I get this call from the IRD, "Oh, we've seen you on TV. You seem to be a big, successful company. We've never had like a tax return or anything from you." And I'm like, what the hell? And, then it turned out like all of our tax payments had been going to this accountant who'd been basically blowing it and didn't have it. And anyway, he was worried about, I got him debarred or whatever it's called from the accountant organisation.
You get your
decharted or whatever.
Yeah.
But he was obviously worried about the evidence against him for like a police prosecution. So he wouldn't even give me my company records. So he took off with the company records. Wow. And so I didn't have access to the accounting thing. So then I couldn't tell IRD, I couldn't prove anything, and I'm like, so they just were like, you have to
physical
pay.
records then. This is pre-zero. This is
pre-zero and all this kind of thing. So anyway, I went round to his house with a baseball bat, and I knocked the baseball bat in the window, and I said, I'm coming through this window and I'm getting my stuff. So you can either open the door and put all the files you have outside and we never have to see each other again, or I am going to beat you, and you can call the cops, but they won't be here in 5 minutes. And what do you want to do? And I was dead serious. It's the only time I've been so angry I could have murdered someone. But anyway, he was like, oh, here's your files. And I didn't do anything to hurt him, but I felt like it. But then I ended up having to basically pay, $250,000 penalties and things with the IRD as a small company and everything. So I had to dig
the fact that he'd defrauded you, the IRD would not.
Well, they were like the tax is still due.
Yeah,
they waived the penalties, but they still wanted the tax.
Right. There was an error with the IRD back in the late 90s, early noughties, and I'll check in when this was for a second, when they were ruthlessly pursuing people for back payment of tax, and there were 3 suicides in the space of about 3 months. Yeah, that computer guy in
Dunedin or something, yeah.
Yeah, there was 3 people that took their own lives because the IRD they were just absolutely like, I don't know who the, not the Ombudsman, the Chief Commissioner was, but they were like, collect money at all costs and don't care about the humans. And then they changed a little bit along the way as well, but obviously they were going through whatever era they were going through and needing their money back from you. So, so $250K plus the money that he'd taken out of the business, which was probably more than $250K, I'm guessing as well.
I think it was about $250K. Yeah.
Okay, right. So that was the second or the third flirtation with near bankruptcy.
I can't remember which order they came. Actually, they were probably pretty close together.
Apologies for the interruption, and thanks for listening to the show. These shows take resources to build and put together. We have a team of producers, we have some promoters behind the scenes, and of course we have the guests that generously give their time to come on the show. My only ask of you is that you go and check out my website. I advise founders on how to build value and how to navigate the exit process successfully. We have a diagnostic on the website. There's an ebook that I've written. There's a free chapter of my upcoming book, Entrepreneur, on there. So I'd just urge you to take a couple of minutes and go and check out joshcomrie.com. You've had a number of approaches. You've been through near bankruptcy. You're getting to I'm guessing you actually sold the company in 2007. Mm-hmm. So who was it that was the one that really got you to the table to have a conversation about buying the company, and when did that happen?
So, the internet was exciting to everyone, and so I had approaches every kind of year. But as I say, I had a huge amount of ambition, and I suppose in the early days, I kind of thought, I'm going to be Mark Zuckerberg, I'm going to be Google, I'm going to be, whatever, even though those companies didn't exist. But in the early days of the internet, you have to understand there just seemed like there's so much potential. And so my goal was to kind of have like the world's biggest internet company. I wanted to be like there was no limit. And every year, people would approach because the internet was exciting with, checkbooks and things. And I had some willpower to turn them down, and I kind of knew, I believed in myself. But what happened is, Google did start, and then, kind of Facebook started. And in the early days, it seemed like the ISPs were like the kings of the kingdom, and like we're providing the internet and we're this big thing. And then all of a sudden it seemed like, by the end of what I was doing, it was like, well, telcos are kind of not really making any money, and the actual internet companies, the Googles of the world that just, they don't have to pay for any internet, they just provide, some service. That seems to be kind of where it is. And, MySpace came along, and then it was this, hundreds of millions of dollars thing. And I was like, people are starting companies in Silicon Valley and they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I'm grinding away and I'm not even the biggest internet company in New Zealand. And I kind of, I had a goal of being the biggest internet company in New Zealand. And in actual fact, every year that I was in business, and I was only in business for 9 years, I more than doubled the size of the company. So we had plus 100% growth every year. So we basically went from just me in the first year to me and my cousin, Mark, and an employee, to 8 people, to 16, 32, 64, and almost bang on that. And when I sold, it was 128 or so. So wow. I did that, and it was based on turnover, staff numbers of customers. We were doubling. So the year before I sold, we were 30,000, and then we were like 60,000 when we sold. So 30,000 customers, we're signing up 100 a day. When I sold, so I was doing kind of real numbers, but by the time Telecom, which is the number one telco in New Zealand now, Spark, got into the game, all of a sudden they're just bang, they're just huge because they've got phone bills, and they just roll it out, and it's like a steamroller. And I'm like, well, I'm kind of not making as much money as I thought. I'm not number one. I had these dreams, and I guess I started getting beaten down. And then actually one of the real reasons I probably sold, and I wish that I'd held on for another 3 years, but one of the real reasons that I sold was I went to Thailand in 2004. And you might remember there was a sort of Boxing Day Indian Ocean tsunami.
Oh yeah, vividly.
So a weird kind of thing in my life is I went to Thailand, and I ended up getting Giardia. So I had a tummy bug, which Giardia is like a little intestinal parasite, like a water flea, that breeds and makes you sick and have diarrhea and things. Anyway, so a few days before Christmas, I was on Koh Phi Phi Island, which is like where the beach was filmed with Leo DiCaprio. Yep. Having a nice time, but I've got Giardia, so I'm like feeling like not good, and I'm like, fucking food here is awful, and it's like I'm on a tropical paradise, but I'm not like that happy. Anyway, I was supposed to be in Thailand for the full moon parties with my girlfriend at the time, and I was just like, I just want to go home. I just want to see my mum. I don't think of myself as a massive mummy's boy, but I do love my mum a lot. She is an absolute sweetheart. But I was just like, I just want to be home with mum. I don't know if I can do this full moon party, and I'm sick of Thailand, So I booked a flight and flew out of Thailand. And when I landed, literally at Auckland Airport, on the screens, it was like massive tsunami, like millions of people's dead. So I landed like Boxing Day in New Zealand, and 200,000 people died. And on the island, the resort that I was at, every single person died. So there was kind of like a final destination thing. And so it got me thinking about, mortality. What do I want to be doing with my life? And I started getting a little bit more philosophical rather than just, I'm a corporate, I'm going to make money and like nothing else matters. And the other thing that happened is that the Giardia I had ended up causing me like ongoing intestinal problems, irritable bowel syndrome. So I'd always had like an iron constitution, perfect kind of poops and things. And then I worked out much later what happened is that I went to the doctor. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, although it was pretty obvious. They tested me for Giardia, which for some reason showed it was negative. So then they started going down rabbit holes of other things. They gave me random antibiotics, which didn't work, but kind of killed my intestinal flora. And then finally I was like, you need to retest for whatever. And then they found, Giardia. And for some reason they'd missed it, but they'd put me on all these kind of things that hadn't been right, that had basically killed my bioflora. And then because I'd had Giardia for 3 months, my intestinal system was all cut up with basically little holes where they'd like drilled, in. And then I had the right antibiotics, and within half an hour of having the right antibiotics, I was like, oh my God, I feel so much better. But I never kind of fully recovered for a long time. And then I kind of went to the doctor and said, I took the antibiotics, I definitely feel better, but I don't feel 100%. So he was like, have more antibiotics, maybe we haven't killed it, more antibiotics. What had actually happened is I just killed my internal flora. I no longer had Giardia. And so I ended up really having a problem like digestively, where my digestion went haywire. And, they say, feelings come from your gut, right? So all of a sudden I'm at work, and instead of feeling like I am the king, I'm going to like be a, 100 billionaire, whatever, I'm like, I feel like this decision's making me feel queasy. And I'm like, I don't know whether it's like the decision or the blah, but I kind of lost my nerve a little bit. And anyway, so that was definitely a contributing factor in me kind of saying, okay, I didn't win. Google's, now the thing. And like, I did good, but at the end of the day, I was a poor boy from Glenfield, and someone came along and said, do you want $20 million? And I was like, yes, that sounds good. I'll take that. But the sale process was actually pretty brutal. And I ended up selling to Cordia, which was a state-owned enterprise, but they were really paranoid about being defrauded because it was government money, and really paranoid about, is this the right thing for them? And they toed and froed, and I hadn't run a process, and you really need competitive pressure. I didn't really get competitive pressure. I just was like, these are my buyers. And so the process dragged on, and they ended up basically running the process for nearly a year. So I owned Orcon for 9 years from where to go. The whole last year of 9 years was a year of selling it. And because I took my eye off the ball, because I'm worried about the sale process, then I'm no longer selling. So then our growth isn't as good. So then they're like, oh, well, your growth's not so good. And I'm like, I've been talking to you for a year. Of course my growth's not as good. Keep asking me all these questions. And they did due diligence, just due diligence that you couldn't even imagine, auditors, and it was really brutal. And in retrospect, I should have been like, look, you guys get to look up my skirt this much, and if you don't like it, you can piss off, And I let them kind of, go on and on and on, and then they ended up beating me down on price on where we'd started. So, wasn't super happy with kind of myself and them in retrospect. But, health-wise and seeing my own mortality and things, there's some, it's tied up a little bit in that story. And, I'll do something else. And I kind of thought, $20 million is all I'd ever need for my whole life. And you can definitely live on that, but it's different from hundreds.
I get that.
It's different from hundreds.
I don't get hundreds, but it's funny. At a not dissimilar stage, I contracted something from the States from Sim Water, and I had a similar journey in my mid-20s. So I ended up with a thing that morphed its way into ulcerative colitis, UC, which is a lower intestinal issue. And I learned through that experience that you can't outsource your health outcomes to someone else. You need to take ownership of those health outcomes. And as caring and as attentive as some of the medical professionals can be, they only see the world through the lens that they've been given. And so surgeons, for example, what I now understand is that their raison d'etre while they're here is to cut. And so they kept wanting to cut me open and whip out bits of my intestine because that was what they were trained to do. And I'm like, whoa, pre-internet days, like, this is weird. This doesn't seem right. And so I had to take my own health outcomes. But I suffered through that for a couple of 3 years myself, so not dissimilar journey. So do you recall the difference between the number that they originally said, hey, the letter of intent, non-binding letter, offer letter, or and what they ultimately ended up paying? You said it was less. Do you remember what the difference between those two was?
So basically, we agreed on 25 mil, and it wasn't too bad. I'd started shopping around at higher numbers, so I'd almost had a deal with like iHug and Vodafone to kind of put something together at like 30. Mm-hmm. So there were higher, kind of non-serious bids.
Interest, yeah.
But then with Cordia, basically what happened is we had everything agreed. The contract ran to several hundred pages because it was like included due. I mean, it's ridiculous. I've still got it somewhere. It's like a book,
Wow.
And every word had been poured over, and I was like nervous, and they were nervous, and blah. Anyway, we literally got down to the signing, and it was $25 million round, and then the CEO of Cordia was like, got me in a room. I signed, he signed, and then he was like, I think we're paying too much. We're just going to pay like $1 million less. So basically took $750,000 off the price, wrote it in the contract, crossed it out. I was like, take it or leave it. So then I went out to Mark, who was my other shareholder, and I was like, they just like, screwed us, but what do we want to do? And then I was like, I'm going to roll over. So basically rolled me at the last second, even though we kind of have everything agreed, which I thought was
a real dick move.
Scummy thing to do. But, they were worried being an SOE, overpaying. But
what were the warranties like?
I had a 3-year restraint of trade. I mean, it was a shares deal, which is more complicated than an assets deal. So in an assets deal, you basically just say, okay, we're buying the customer base, we're novating the contracts, we have this and we don't have this. When you buy a shares deal, you buy all the assets and all the liabilities, and so there can be things like hidden liabilities. So that's what they were paranoid about. But the issue for them was that to do an assets deal, I've purchased over 40 other internet companies, so that was one of the ways that I grew at Orcon, as I sucked up a lot of these internet companies that were failing, and that's actually kind of my secret sauce. I did an acquisition every month, non-stop for 5 years, so it wasn't so much of our own growth, it was acquisitions. But anyway, all of the deals that I did were assets deals, but they had to do a shares deal because we were such a big company that things like, contracts for power on a data center, you have to, they can refuse to change them and all kinds of things. So if you buy the company, you just get everything, and you don't even need to notify the customers. You just, it's your company. It's basically a change of shareholders. But they were paranoid that maybe I had some liability that I hadn't disclosed. So they had money in trust. They had $5 million of the settlement that was in trust for a period that they could claw back, and all kinds of things which got unwound and was complicated. And I was worried that they were going to screw me and try and find some way of not paying it out. And it was complicated, but when you're dealing with tens of millions, that's kind of it. But they were way more cautious than in retrospect they needed to be. And then after the purchase, they were like, oh, this is a really good company. Your customers love us. The churn's really low. You've done a fantastic job. And I'm like, I know. I was trying to tell you. And even today, Orcon has the highest brand loyalty of any ISP because of just somehow we created this kind of vibe. It was just we just did a really good job with the marketing.
I want to touch on a couple of points here, Seeby, not just because I'm your mate, but I feel duty-bound to do so. You were 29 years old, right? So it's not like you'd been around in business for 50 years and you kind of should have known better, or you'd been, hustling and doing all these variety of different things in your career. It's the first time you'd sold a company. You'd bought a number of companies. That's the first thing. The second thing is 2007 was 1 year before the GFC kicked in. And so you've mentioned that they went on and sold it for a few $100 million a few years down the path. But what didn't factor in there was the hell that a lot of people had to go through during the 2008 to 2012 for a lot of companies, 2010 for other businesses. But there was a really difficult time there. So you actually aced the timing at that point in time. Yes, maybe if you'd held on for another 7 years, you could have had a different deal, but you would have had to go through that hell, and who knows what the business would have looked like had you had to face into that storm. So you're 29 years old, 30 years old. You've got $20-odd million, a lot of it in the bank. The company had been profitable up until that point in time, so you had some assets. So what does a 29-year-old do when he gets $20 million in cash?
Well, I look back and, I don't know, I kind of shake my head, but I did what I did. So basically I was like, I am not going to need any money like ever again. And something that I kind of knew in the back of my head was real estate always goes up. So in 6 weeks, I spent $18 million on residential property.
18.
I bought a $10 million house in Milford, which was kind of my dream house and still is, and I sold it later on, but I regret selling it. But anyway, had a $10 million house in Milford on 3 sections on the cliff. Wow. So 35, 37 and 39, all like large sections. And yeah, I mean, the house had 9 bedrooms, it had 3 living rooms, it had 2 main kitchens and 3 sub kitchens, it had a butler's pantry, it had a music room, it had a massage room, it had ended up building a nightclub that was like looked out to the beach with a view of Rangitoto that was bigger than most people's houses, with fish tanks and retractable stripper poles. So, my nightclub, my personal nightclub at my house in Milford was bigger than most people's homes. It was a really, baller pad. And then I kind of was like, well, maybe I want a country house, so I'll buy a house in the country. So I had a house in Coatesville, and then I was like, maybe I want a batch, maybe I want this, maybe I want a blah. So I spent all this money, and then I was like, oh, I've only got $2 million left. And then I was like, oh, well, $2 million lasts a while. And then almost immediately after I spent all that money, bad news started coming out of the US of like, oh, this isn't looking good, and that isn't looking good. And I guess 2007, you got to remember things were very like exuberant. People were like, property you can't lose, and like the roll up. So I was like, it doesn't matter what property I buy, I'm not going to lose any money. And then 6 months later, I'm like, oh, I've been really stupid. This is bad. Things are getting bad. And then I was like, oh, I don't have that much money left. Like, this is not good. I've spent all my money, and so I ended up basically having 3 homes that were ridiculous, and I ended up pulling it back and losing $1 million a piece on 2 of the homes. So I lost a couple of $1 million almost immediately from 2007, 2008. But I still had 18, still had my $10 million house. And then I pivoted and I took the losses, and then I invested in, I bought commercial property, and I bought pretty well. So I ended up buying 6 commercial properties. And, when the crash happened, obviously interest rates got really low, and then people were also underwater and desperate. So, I bought 3 or 4 decent sized office buildings in Auckland. One, I tripled my money a few years later. One, I doubled my money a few years later, and one I made like $4 million. So I made another $16 to $20 million of capital gain from commercial property in this sort of, maybe 5 to 8 years after. So I had some pain with the residential, but I kind of then pivoted and made some money in commercial. But then I've had some subsequent pain. So. Yeah.
You mentioned the nightclub in your house, the retractable stripper poles, and you had a bit of notoriety around it at that time in the press for bits and pieces, and known as a bit of a party boy around town as well.
Yeah, I mean, so not those years, but yeah, I ended up getting divorced, and then when I got divorced, I kind of was like, I've had this party house for 10 years, and I don't need, the whole. It's more than I need, and I'll do something different. And I kind of thought, I think I read something or I saw something years ago that basically said, if you just do the same thing your entire life, then it's kind of like you don't have a sense of massive amounts of time passing. Because say for example, if you live in the same house with the same person, the same blah blah, then all of your memories are kind of collapsed in on the same. You don't really have. You can't kind of tell the passing of time. So I've always probably, like a lot of people, been a bit paranoid about, death and dying and things. And so I wanted to like have the fullest life possible. And to me, if you can divide your life up into, these years I did this and this years I did this, you've got all these kind of, things. So, I've been to like 137 countries and I've done all kinds of things. And, I like having that. It's like, it seems like there's a lot of things I've done, so I've got all these memories. But anyway, selling my big house was a freaking mistake because I really loved that place and I spent a lot of money on it. And then it's worth way over 20 mil now, and I sort of sold it at a loss because I got divorced and I was like, I just want to sell it quickly, and it probably hasn't gone up in value, and it was ridiculous. These big assets don't move, and I just did an emotional. Wife's gone, I want to go traveling, I'm just going to sell the house. But, I would have been $12 million better off not selling it and still have the house that I loved. So that's one of my big disasters, yeah.
It's tough. So you have another kind of internet-oriented, but it's full-service telco these days in Voyager. So you started that in 2012, I think, is that right?
2010.
Okay. So end of restraint,
Yep.
decided to wade back into the space. What was it that made you go, I'll delve back into the kind of similar sort of space again?
So I as I say, I did okay in commercial property. I made somewhere between 15 and 20 mil capital gain. I actually would go back to get calculated, and there's obviously some capex and things that might have got deducted. But I did okay in commercial property. But the issue is that in commercial property, I was starting out, as a 30-year-old with no commercial property experience. After selling Orcon, I read Jones on property. Love a bit of Bob Jones.
Yep.
He's a cantankerous kind of old, grumpy old bastard.
Yeah, he's lovable.
But his books are an awesome read, funny, and you learn a lot. And so, and as a kid, I read like Rich Dad Poor Dad. So I went through my kind of property investing portfolio, read about how to do it, and kind of figured, okay, I'll put my hand at it. And, the thing about commercial property is you're kind of playing with yields, right? So it's like when interest rates are low, you can buy lower, and then, if interest rates go up, the value of the building can fall down. So it's just like timing and things. So I kind of worked out a lot of that. But at the end of the day, I made money in commercial property, but I still got my lunch eaten. So my commercial property portfolio, had I not sold it, again, would be worth 60 million. So I bought these buildings, did some improvements, kind of made some money, and thought, I bought a $3 million building and sold it for 10, and I'm like, I'm the best. And then it turns out, that building's worth, way more now, and recently transacted for 18. So I'm like, actually, a lot of the time with property, you just want to hold it. If I just bought my $10 million house, which would now be worth 20, and held my commercial property that I bought for 20, it would be worth 60. And then I got $80 million of assets. And instead of been doing all this fiddling around and reworking things and buying and selling, and then I've ended up with like 40, So it was probably where my net worth would sit, today. So I'm not trying to in any way be complainy, but I just feel like I did a lot more work that was necessary to make a lot less. When sometimes all you need to do is just not stop moving, like just sit on an asset and let it happen.
Yeah.
And I just got too busy, so I sort of made half the money that I should have by working 3 times harder than I should have. And that's been kind of disappointing and frustrating, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, you say 137 countries. That's a lot of travelling, and so that's a restlessness that's obviously there, and so I'm guessing that's kind of factored into your decision to get in and out of a bunch of these things. When perhaps the smart thing could have been to buy and hold and sit on that asset.
Yeah, I mean, after my divorce, which was now a decade ago, I knew that I wanted to kind of go traveling, and I thought, well, I'll see the world, and I don't have kids, so before I meet another woman I want to settle down with, I'll just do the things that everyone wants to do. So I went to Africa, and I picked up photography, and I went and saw a bunch of people, and went on a whole lot of adventures. And I thought, why do I want to have my $10 million house sitting in New Zealand unoccupied while I'm doing that? It doesn't make any sense. But actually just leaving it in New Zealand with no one in it would have been the best financial decision. Yeah. So selling it was a terrible financial decision, and I had the money, and then I kind of ploughed some of that money into Voyager, but then I had to, Voyager's an asset that I had to look after more than a house, even remotely. So I'd have to come back, and I haven't done everything right, but it's obviously hard to do everything right.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's not like you've done a lot of things wrong as well. You've ended up in a strong financial position, and you've had a whole ton of amazing experiences.
Well, I mean, one of the things that happened is, I started Orcon, and as I say, in the early days, the internet providers were kind of the kings. It's like we're the internet providers. We're going to become, every internet company is becoming going to be a phone company, and then its phone calls are going to go over the internet, and all the phone companies like telecom wanted to become internet companies, and all the internet companies wanted to become phone companies, and then you did end up with kind of internet phone companies, and it was thinking, well, then we're going to become media companies, and then we're going to become TV companies, and so streaming was kind of on the horizon, and it seemed, the early days of the internet seemed like there was nothing that an internet provider couldn't do, and then now it's kind of like, oh well, the internet companies have to provide millions of dollars of infrastructure, fiber optic cables, servers, everything, and then all these companies like Google and Netflix just use all that infrastructure, don't pay us anything for it other than the subscribers, and like make all the big bucks because it's like the cool idea. So it's from that side of thing, it's frustrating.
You talked about Tony Robbins earlier on, and we bumped into each other at, I think, 2 Tony Robbins events, and so not just a conversation about Tony, but growth is obviously something which is near and dear to you. Tell me about some of the, 1 or 2 of the amazing growth experiences that you've had that could be travel related, that could be otherwise.
So Tony and I have a history in that. As I say, when I was a kid, I was a young businessman in search of a business idea, and I dreamed about being in business from like 13, 14, 15, it was like, I'm going to be a businessman. That's just what I had the vision for myself. And so just before I started Orcon, Tony had his personal Power 2 ads, the young guy, and I think he was like 29 with the big teeth and the whole thing on TV, and I saw the infomercial, and I literally was like, yes. So I bought Personal Power 2, and I listened to those tapes until they like disintegrated in my car player.
Same here.
But my dad, was not that mentally well. He was basically a tortured artist kind of. So he read a lot of kind of Russian authors, which I think is a terrible thing to do.
Oh, they're miserable.
Dostoevsky or whatever is just completely miserable, and they're like the human condition and things. So all this like random, kind of Russian literature filled my dad's head that he'd read as a kid, depressing, like wartime, like life is pain stuff. Yeah. And, listening to Tony, I was like, I just ate it up. He's, the whole things like the concepts of pleasure versus pain, how to get leverage on yourself while you procrastinate, all of these kind of things. And fantastic education, even now. So Tony, I don't know that I would have started Orcon without Tony Robbins. Anyway, after I got divorced, I was feeling pretty lost, and for some reason I saw something with Tony Robbins, and I thought, I literally haven't thought about Tony Robbins for 20 years, and like kind of what was he up to? And then I was like, he's doing Destiny at Date with Destiny in Gold Coast, and okay, well, Gold Coast 2.5 hours away. So I ended up basically going to a Tony Robbins event and getting all fired up and Tony'd. And if you've ever watched Tony on video, it's not really like a thing, but if you've been in a stadium with 25,000 people jumping up and down, it's a thing. Like you feel it,
Yeah.
And so I got addicted to kind of the Tony buzz, and I was like, I mean, he's a billionaire in his own right. He's got 400 companies because people have partnered with him, and he's an intelligent guy. So I was like, I want to soak up all this information, and he's got 9 different courses. So I ended up doing all 9 Tony Robbins courses twice over a period of a year, and basically following him around. And he had a program called the Platinum Program, which was kind of 150 people that had intimate access, backstage passes, and a whole lot of stuff. That was $150,000 US a year. So I kind of probably blew $250,000 following Tony Robbins around, which I don't regret at all. But, got to have personal discussions with him, got to be on safari with him in Africa, had a spiritual experience with him in India. Like, he's an amazing connected guy. So it's kind of like having a rebirth. But at some point I got toned out, and I was like, when I'm in the course and I'm like literally saying the speech in my head, I know every word that's coming, and I'm like, why am I here? Like, I'm wasting a year of my life. And I was like, one day I woke up and I was like, I've got to get out of here. No more Tony Robbins. I love Tony. He's an angel, but a year of your life doing Tony Robbins is, it was. I don't do things by half. It was excessive, but it was an education. But it's interesting because I don't think I've ever told anyone this story. Maybe a couple of people know this, but as I say, I started, knowing Tony's stories and analogies, but then when I kind of came to apply it, I was like, do I really have any of this stuff in me? Like, is it there, or am I just watching this incredibly talented, entertaining person save other people, and am I doing it myself? And because Tony says that, you can watch as much self-help stuff as you want, but unless you actually apply it, it's all a waste of time.
Totally.
So if you treat it as if you treat it as Tony Robbins TV, and then you just go back to eating junk food and you don't apply, like, it's next to useless. So he's like, how are you actually applying what you've learned? And time again, I would go to a Tony Robbins seminar, and he'd say that, like, and then I'd go, oh yeah, I didn't apply that. Like, he's told me this, and I actually didn't apply this thing. And probably 80% of Tony I haven't, but there's definitely some things I have. But anyway, I thought that I hadn't really absorbed a lot of stuff. But one of my friends in desperation brought a suicidal postpartum girl to me that had postpartum depression, where she had like some sort of chemical, physical thing, had a child, and the dad wasn't around, and she was just like really struggling, and was like, oh, you've been to Tony Robbins, like, help her. And I was like, I don't know what to do, like, help. And then anyway, I sat her down, and then like 5 hours of Tony Robbins lectures just like came out, and I was like, where did that come from? And she was like, oh, this is great, thank you for helping me talk about life. And I saw her on Facebook the other day, so she's still alive, but she was at least threatening to attempt to kill herself. So and I don't credit myself for saving her or anything. It was all her decision, but definitely there was some Tony stuff that's in there, and I think is valuable. So
they say that if you're feeling in a blue or a glum place, if you've got some depression's a very inward facing thing, and I'm talking about generally not you nor her, but they say the best thing that you can possibly do if you're feeling down is to go and find someone to help and then serve that person. So there was obviously some form of calling, or your friend found the calling, whatever it might have been, to kind of help that person. So clearly Tony was in there, just not in the way to applying it to whatever context you were sitting in. So speaking of spiritual journeys, you've done a bunch of Burning Men.
7 Burning Men.
7 of the burn. So kind of that they say it's not something that I've experienced, but they say that it's wonderful and bloody hard work all at the same time. So key lessons from someone who's been through a whole bunch of Burning Men.
Yeah, I mean, Burning Man is it's first time burners kind of go wanting like a huge big party, drug festival, orgy kind of thing, and there's some of that you can find. It's not all about that, but Burning Man's it's a real spiritual experience, and that's not really discussed or conveyed. I mean, one of the things is the first Burning Man I went to, I actually went with my now ex-wife, and we got engaged at Burning Man because we had such a, it was just like a kind of a magical thing. So that's where we got engaged. And then I had trepidation about going back because I thought it would have negative connotations. But then I ended up going back to kind of make peace with it. And then I ended up going back again kind of as a photographer. And anything that you do multiple times kind of becomes like almost like a a prayer or like a, pilgrimage or something. There's kind of value in doing things multiple times and deepening the experience. But firstly, Burning Man is weekend to weekend, so it's 9 days, and a lot of festivals are 3 days. And if you're partying for like 9 days, you tend to have, if you party for 3 days, you can party and then kind of go back to work on Monday and you haven't had like a cleansing. But if you party for 9 days, things tend to happen. You have arguments with your campmates, you have a breakdown, you take too many drugs, you get too hot, you reach that point of exhaustion, and there's kind of a cathartic healing where you're in the desert long enough to actually start thinking some of those deep thoughts. The other thing is that, Burning Man is a constructed city, once a year, and most of, all the art and everything's made from wood, and then at the end of Burning Man, it's all burnt, hence the name, not just the big man in the middle, but, there's dozens of fires. There's the temple burn, there's the man burn, there's the, 9 o'clock burn, there's all the kind of things. And all that culminates kind of with the temple burn on Sunday night. And it's a strange environment because the player, which is what they call it, which is Spanish for like a lake bed or a beach, it's the largest naturally occurring flat surface on Earth, I believe. It's an ancient lake bed that's 100 miles long by 20 miles wide, and Burning Man's probably about 10 kilometres or 10 miles wide around in a circle. So it's this huge flat surface, and everything is so far away that the mountains are almost like you don't really even see them. So it's, if you're a ship in the ocean, there's that kind of scary feeling where you can see in 360 degrees and it's just the horizon. Yeah. So Burning Man's like that, except you're on a white surface, which is very alien because there's no plants, there's no animals, there's no insects, there's no mosquitoes, there's no anything. You're in the desert and it's perfectly flat. There's no sand dunes, and the player dust is kind of like chalk dust. So it's finer than sand. If you get it in your eye, it doesn't even hurt. It's so fine, it just kind of dissolves and turns into kind of, you rub crap out of your eye every now and again. But it's not sandy. It's like dusty. But then it somehow packs down, so it's almost like it packs down like chalk, so that you can ride a bike on it, and it's kind of firm and like bouncy that you can kind of jump up and down on. It's not like sand where your bike tire would get, bogged down. So it's got this firmness, but it's also all dust, and there's no cracks in it. It's not like clay. It doesn't bind to itself, so it's always dust. And it's just very hard to describe. It's just a very unusual thing. And when you're on a ship in the sea and you can't see land anywhere, there's that kind of scary feeling of like, it just feels scary. Because normally in your day-to-day life, there's always something behind you. There's a building, there's a tree, there's a something. So there's always these objects. And if there's nothing in front of you, if you're at the beach, you turn around, there's something behind you. But in Burning Man or in the middle of the ocean, you're kind of on this flat surface where you can see as far as the eye can see, and there's nothing but flatness. And so everything kind of looks the same from every angle. So, you need a bicycle or an art car to drive around Burning Man. But the funny thing is that even when you're sober, it seems almost like you're in the same place at all times, and every direction always looks the same. So it's very disorienting. You can get lost very, very easily. You just turn around and you're lost and you don't know which direction you're going. And that's why it fosters adventures. So, Burning Man is a circle. So provided you don't go outside the circle, you're in the circle, you turn around, you see something here and there, and it's like, you don't know which way you're pointing, and then it's like, but it's also very logical. So Burning Man is the city is designed in a circle. Most of the art's in the middle, which is called the central player, and then outside the circle is called the deep player. And the circles are concentric from A to Z. So there's A ring, B ring, like Rome. And then the straight roads are like the hours of the clock. So basically you can say to someone, I'm at J at 9:15 or whatever. Right. And immediately you know where the camp is. And if you're at B in 2:45, you can navigate, but you have to look at the road signs. So the road signs are quite small. So you can easily get disoriented, but then you can also find a road sign and know exactly where to go. Right. And so there's all these little things, and there's a lot of sacred geometry, there's a lot of mathematics, there's secret societies that you can get into at Burning Man, there's like the lantern callers, there's camps that do their own thing. So there's basically 800 camps of 100 people, each are sort of self-sufficient. So there's a solar energy camp, there's a kid-friendly camp, there's a BDSM camp, there's a fight club camp, there's a camp with rollerblading, there's a camp with, blah, anything. There's a camp that all they do is go to Burning Man and give out free cheese toasted sandwiches called Moon Cheese. There's all these camps where they like have a thing, and it's kind of like, when you're in like Malaysia, it's like the Malaysian people are different. Well, Burning Man has like these subsects where it's like you can join a subsect and then you can get into it. You can be the jiu-jitsu people or these people or that people, and the camps have personalities. So, one of the coolest camps is Robot Heart, which has, they're kind of like the coolest of the cool. They fly in sushi, they have supermodels, they have the big DJs, and they're so cool that their camp has to kind of be mobile, where they have a big basically bus. And then to avoid everyone turning up at their camp, they just basically drive around and deep player. So you constantly having to find them. They're constantly trying to lose them. And then they're so cool, they've got all the attention. Everyone's trying to find them, but they just disappear. And like for years, Daft Punk used to basically not go to Burning Man, not tell anyone where they would play, randomly pop up, and it was literally the 50 people that would round would get like a private Daft Punk concert.
Wow.
So I bumped into Elon Musk at Burning Man and had like a 5-minute conversation. I've seen Paris Hilton at Burning Man. I saw Susan Sarandon at Burning Man. There's like celebrities undercover. So you can be at Burning Man, you'll turn up in some random camp. There's people from all around the world. There's usually people from 200 countries, and you're like, there's different languages. You're talking to people. There's like a vibe at the camp. There's a camp that's like all pink fluffy things. There's couches. There's blah. If you're at a BDSM camp, they'll want to spank you. Like it's like this whole like wild west of like what's going on. And then you'll be with some Hollywood star or something. You're like, oh, holy shit, it's like you. And they've, people wear dust masks and things,
yes,
so
you've got no idea.
You don't see. So it's just such an adventure that's just really hard to describe. And then you throw some like magic mushrooms on top, and it feels pretty quickly, even with a small amount of psychedelics, like you're on the surface of the moon, and you're like, am I really still on Earth? Like, hang on, no. You're kind of thinking, am I at Burning Man or somewhere else? And they call it, going home to like, the kind of. There's like a secret world where you go to Burning Man, it's kind of dusty, you're sober, you get there, you unpack your stuff, and you're not a Burning Man. And then all of a sudden there's this kind of vibe where all of a sudden it like changes, and it's like a different thing where everyone forgets everything on the outside world, and it's literally, like you've taken a spaceship to Mars or something, and everyone's got this shared experience. It's really an incredible party. But,
yes.
Every year people say it's getting too commercial, yada, yada, yada. But it's always been incredible every time I've gone.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. So getting to the end of the conversation, the alternate career conversation is what I'm about to ask you, but I'm going to preface it because I know the answer to this question. So Seeby's an incredible photographer. You've got a Instagram account with over 1 million followers on it. At Seeby Photography. Your personal Instagram account has over 1 million followers on it as well. A couple of remarkable numbers. You actually hold a couple of world records, participated in a couple of pretty cool events to do some things. But the alternate career, in your own words, Seeby, tell us about that.
If we're talking about photography, I suppose... people have, jobs, and then they have passions. And I suppose, in my 20s, honestly, the internet was a passion. The reason I got back into the internet, I didn't finish that. Sorry, I realised I didn't finish that. Was that, the commercial property guys were kind of eating me for lunch. Like I made money, but they were still, I'm like the new guy on the block. I don't have lots of experience. Whereas, there's not very many people that by 30 have, 10 years of experience in telco and things like interconnect and how internet routing works and undersea cables and all that technology is all the stuff I've learned about that the average man on the street doesn't know. So I was kind of like, why would I want to take that off the table? So the reason I started Voyager after Orcon, which, Voyager is still, New Zealand's sixth largest company, sixth largest internet company. We've got 1% market share, 40 million turnover and over 100 staff. So it's a decent sized organisation. Yeah. It's Voyager is bigger than turnover than Orcon was when I sold Orcon, and probably similar value. But it just made sense for me to use my knowledge to do something. But anyway, and I enjoy technology, but it's kind of work, and obviously people have hobbies, so I do recreational flying. I don't have my pilot's license, but I've been flying solo for 6 years, which I'm allowed to do under like supervised private pilot's license. I've got 4 motorbikes, go on adventures. I rode cross country across the United States, and I've done New Zealand a bunch of times. I do photography, I play piano. So a man's got to have hobbies. So I've probably got a lot. And because I don't have kids or a wife, I probably have a lot more than your average person.
Mm-hmm.
But photography for me is interesting because, it's a way of kind of seeing the world. It's also a way of me recording my adventures. So I've got 500,000 photos from 137 countries around the world. Most of them I've never published and hardly anyone's ever seen. So it's kind of like I wanted to publish them, but it takes a long time to sort through and select and edit and all that sort of stuff. So I just basically been taking photographs for 10 years, not really publishing for 10 years. Yep. So maybe it's sort of like a retirement thing for me that I can actually show people one day, like all the credible photos that I've taken, because I've taken hundreds of thousands and people have only seen a fraction. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a way of me recording my adventures, but also I really like it because I'm a Libra, and I'm not super superstitious in terms of star signs or anything, but Libra's all about balance, right? And I happen to be ambidextrous, and possibly because I didn't learn to write as a kid, but I think I am ambidextrous. I play piano, and I can play tennis with either hand. I can golf with either hand. So I kind of think I've got that thing. So I like my hands to be even, and I like my left brain and my right brain to be even. And there's a lot of pursuits where I feel like if I'm doing hard maths or something, it's like I'm living in like one side of my brain. Mm-hmm. But if you are a really artistic person, like a hippie or something, you can't necessarily take a great photograph unless you kind of learn about your gear and like read the manuals and go to all the details and that kind of thing. And the manual for my current camera is 850 pages. I think I read it 5 times, and every time I read it, I find some new function. And then I'm like sitting on my bed and I practice. Okay, if I want to do this, bang, I do this thing. And like very few people learn to like 100% use their gear because they have that obsessiveness. And so, last weekend when I'm photographing Shipwrecked, I'm like thinking, okay, here's a person. This is the type of photo I want. My fingers are already adjusting the dials and like doing exactly what I want to get the effect that I want to go there. And that helps me get, really good photos. And so that kind of left brain activity is stimulating. But if you're just a left brain person, you also can't take a good photo because you need to have some sort of artistic flair. So for me, photography is this dance between deep technical knowledge, and I'm still learning. There's things like gel photography, flash photography, astrophotography. I can't do astrophotography, absolutely nothing. But I've got a friend who does astrophotography, and he's got, a telescope and a timer, and you have to track the motion of the Earth, and it's like, calculating when the moon's going to come up and all this stuff. And I'm like, I could learn it, but it's just this never-ending subject. Like I've been learning photography for 10 years, and I'm still learning stuff. And just 2 festivals ago, I finally perfected a way of balancing foreground and background light that's just from 10 years of experience that suddenly kind of clicked. Yeah. So things are still happening. And just a chance for me to record my memories. But I think I'm good at it, and I like it. But it's kind of pleasure and a pain because I sort of, if I go to a festival or Burning Man, it's a chance for me to talk to people. I do photographs as gifts for people. Yeah. It's a way of interacting. It keeps my mind busy because I've got such a busy mind. If I'm in a festival standing there, I'm like, oh, I'm bored. Well, I don't want to go home. Like I need to answer emails. I've got stuff to do. So having a camera gives me a chance to be like at the festival.
I've seen and participated in a number of those, and you kind of have a gift of being able to be present to get the candid shots, but also get the things that are going on in and around it. And my sense, not being a photography expert, is that you capture the emotion in the photo incredibly well, and so you manage to convey that through the people. Plus, you make us look incredible with no filters and no photoshopping afterwards. So, as a gift to the world, Seeby, thank you. So at Seeby Photography on Instagram is where people can check your work.
Seeby, and my main Instagram is just Seeby.
Okay, so if anyone wants to look you up, find you, then that's a great place to do so. We'll publish the episode on there, no doubt, as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's it would be nice to figure out how to make money out of my photography. Man, photography, I think, is a little bit like being a rock star. And, a lot of things in life there's the 80-20 rule, but in terms of being a rock star, I think it's the 99-1% rule where, 1% of the people make 99% of the money and 99% of the people make 1% of the money. So it's basically a waste of time.
It's basically Spotify.
And I think with photography, it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, there's so many photographers and people that think they can use the camera these days, influencers and stuff, that it's just, you're just, spoiled for choice and tens of thousands of people to follow on Instagram. And probably at the moment I'm in the category of people that makes no money from photography. But if there was a way for me to become one of the % and an Annie Leibovitz or something, I think that would be, nice as I get a bit older.
Yeah,
so
that'd be a cool alternate career.
But sometimes having a hobby and turning it into a career is a bad idea as well. Good way
to ruin your passion, right?
Good way to hate it. Yeah, I've shot a few friends' weddings, and the weddings that I've shot where it's been for love have worked out really well. But if I started getting random people, bridezillas and things, bossing me around, I'd be like, I don't need this.
No.
Having fun, go away.
Yeah. The Price's wedding, you did incredible.
The wedding photographers of New Zealand probably don't have anything to fret about.
Yeah, fair enough. Seeby, it's been a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation. I thank you for your candour. You've been really open with us today, and we've covered a huge array of different subjects. You've been really open about the experience that you had kind of coming through and what your upbringing was like, which was bloody fascinating. I'm sure that everyone, not just your mates and your mum, will find that interesting. And your business navigation, the paths and the twists and the turns that that's taken has been really helpful, especially the focus around the exit and doing the deal and the negotiation, not getting the deal tension, especially in there, and the warranties and the pain of the DD. It was super helpful for the audience that specifically listened for that. But people always love hearing the backstory. So Seeby, I thank you very much for coming on the show today. Yeah,
thanks. It's been a good comprehensive interview. I've did a few of these, and you're probably familiar with Jake Miller, who was a bit of a star interviewing people, and then sadly had his own mental health challenges and is no longer here. And his interviews none of them are up anymore, which they all just sort of disappeared, which is kind of frustrating for a lot of the people that were interviewed, because he was a great interviewer. I had an interview with Jake that was great, but it doesn't seem to exist anywhere. So
sad.
I'm glad that we managed to cover a lot of stuff. Yeah. And thanks for doing a good job.
Thanks, Seeby.
And a professional job.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Nice one.
Thanks.
If you enjoy these episodes, I hope you do. I love filming them, and the guests always say what a great and often cathartic experience it is for them. Then please do like and share. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm open to connect requests, and occasionally get emails from people as well asking me about my experience around certain subjects. So please do like and share, and continue to follow the show. I really appreciate your ears.